Hello everyone. So I'm going to come in with another warm color painting because I've got a lot of orange left on my palette from earlier videos, my earlier demo videos. So I'm just going to cover this canvas with a wet brush. Just so my paint will be able to spread smoothly. I've got a lot of it and it's really thick. I'm going to come back in and take some of that water out of my brush. Pick up some and spread it. All right, so I've just wet a stretched canvas with water. I got a bunch of orange paint, so I'm going to use a lot of orange. Some of it is drying. I was trying to keep it wet on my palette by spraying it, but we're going to just incorporate that into the background and into the painting itself. I'm going to pick up some red here. Got some red left. It's not as much as I thought. And I'm just going to keep working that until that paint saturates into that canvas. I'm going to move this to the front so I can get that edge. And hold it. Those are little pieces of paint that was drying. Just scrub that off. I'm going to get these edges. I'm going to go in the opposite direction just to get those edges covered, and then I'll go back with my horizontal strokes just to get it all mixed now. So I'll go stroke back and forth across the front until that is covered and used up. Okay, remember, as I said in a previous video, you can paint the edges. If you're using stretch canvas, you can paint the edges. That way, if you hang it in your house or if you sell it, you don't have to have a frame. That's a little trick. It's kind of awkward with this. If I go backwards, if I work from the back, it'll work. But then I'm going to have to go back over the front and fix that. So our front is covered. We've laid in our background. Now I'm going to come in with some red and some orange. I'm sorry, some red and some yellow. I have that already on my canvas. I'm just going to pick that up and just lay it right in the canvas. I'm just going to press it in, scrub it in. I might do some mountains this time. I'm still having a problem. I'm going to get that on the edge. I don't want to blend that in too high at the top. I'm going to come back in with some detail here. I'm going to get some more of this yellow. I'm just going to pick all that up, lay all that in, just like that. Another little peak here. Okay. I want to take some more, found some more yellow in another spot of my canvas. Let's go and pick up some of that orange and the remaining red there. Let's get some of that sky. A little bit darker in there before we paint on top of that. Leave some of that color there. You can streak it in. You want like a dusk setting, but it needs to be horizontal, and I'm at an angle and I need to kind of look at that from the front. Streak some of that color in for our dusk and blend lightly. If the paint canvas is wet, it will blend naturally. I like those streaks. Now, I'm going to come in with some red. I'm going to take a palette knife and come in with some red. So I'm going to use a plastic palette knife here. It's got a kind of like an angled edge, sharp edge there. I'm going to take some red. And now this red that I have has a little bit of blue and purple mixed in it from another demo session. But that's okay. We're going to incorporate that into the painting. So I'm going to take a roll of paint that's on the edge there, and I'm going to get on that edge so that I can manipulate it with my hand. And I'm going to, let's see, where's my light source? Maybe here. And then so I'll come back in with my palette knife. And see how I picked up a little bit of purple off the canvas? That's okay because it looks like it's dusk. It looks like it's rocks. I'm just going to come in with that red. That doesn't need to be too wet. Just big old bulbs of color there. I'm just going to scratch that in there. I don't want to pick up too much of the pigment. Got some on this side. Just get that off. Scratch that in. And we're going to blend all that. I just want to make it look like it's rocks. I have a little bit of red left. I need to focus on this peak as well. I want a little bit of highlight there. If our light source is around here, then this side needs to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to take some red on this side. Take that same palette knife. I didn't even clean it. Let's get some red. Down there, we're going to blend that. So we've got that light source kind of in between here. Let's get some shadow. We need to have a separation from this peak and that peak. So let's take that knife and I'm going to have to turn it a little bit, get some other color on the other edge. And let's get that peak in there. Like so. We'll go back in with a brush and clean that up. But you have to have a hint of edge there. Pick some of the color up. You want a natural deviation. You want a natural separation. You don't want a hard line. It's an implied line. Come back in and clean that up with our brush. And then kind of make it disappear in there. Piece of dried paint. Okay, so I'm going to come back in and clean that up. Let's get a little bit more definition down here. Just taking all the rest of that paint off of that palette knife. So what I can do now is go back in with my brush. It doesn't need to be too wet. I can use the large brushes for larger areas and for major blending. I need to come back in with a smaller brush now. I don't want a lot of water on the brush. Remember, this is acrylic, so our solvent is water. I'm going to come back in. I need to get some color on the brush because if I don't, it's going to pick up the color that's there. So why don't we just get the same color that we've been using for the sky and the mountains. Let's just get it in that brush so that the brush is not totally clean. We don't want it clean. We want it a little dirty right now so that when we do our blending, it won't pick up the color. So we've got a little color in there. Yeah, that's good. So let's come back in and we're going to come back in and lay in some more detail here. So let's just blend that in. I might get a little bit more definition for the crop here on the highlighted side. And I want to blend this, and I picked up too much color here, so I'm just going to take a little bit of that and cover up some of those strokes, make it look a little rocky. You don't want the white. When I scratched that palette knife, it scratched some of the paint off the canvas. So you don't want your strokes to blend because you want it to look like rocks, like rocky peaks. But I need to pick up some of that pigment there. And I'm gonna blend that as well. I need to get some of that pigment off now. So I'm going to clean my brush. Keep paper towels handy. This time I'm not going to put any pigment on there. I'm going to take what's already there and just kind of lift it and spread it and lift it and spread it. And you have to be careful here. I just want to blend that just a tad. And this mountain is in the background in the distance. So, well, it's further back. So what I'm going to do, I see a little blob of orange here. I'm going to take a little bit of that because I'm going to put a little bit of that back here. And I've taken all the orange off the rest of my canvas. All right, so now I want to go and put a little bit more highlight on that front piece. I did use up all my yellow. So I'm just going to squeeze out a little tad of yellow. Only use what you need because you're going to have a bunch left over and it'll dry and harden and you can't do anything with it unless you use your leftover paint to make another painting. And I think I want to take this peak out some. Although I think I used up my red, but I think I have some shadow red that I used, that little purplish. So let me get this yellow in here. I'm going to use this side because I want to use it from that side. So I'm going to just take it straight from the tube. I'm not even going to mix it. It's going to mix on the canvas. So I'm going to come back in here with. And you want that mixing to happen because it looks like rocks, dirt. Let's get a little bit more. Don't do too much manipulation with it. Okay, I like that. I like that a lot. I want a little bit right there. That's too much. I want a little bit right there. All right, good. Now I'm going to come back to that a little later. Let me see how that feels for a while. I like that big streak of yellow. I'm going to come back in and fill in. I'm going to make that come out a little bit more. So I'm going to get this yellow off my brush, off my palette knife. I'm going to pick up that. I'm even going to wipe it. So I'm just going to, I don't even have to wash it. I'm just going to wipe it with a paper towel because it doesn't have to be perfectly clean because all of that's blending. I'm going to take, some of this red is still here. So I can even just pick that up, but I don't want to pick up too much because I want it to stay. I want to bring it out to about maybe here. Let's see. So I'm going to need, the only red I have left on my palette is the one that had a little bit of purple in there. So let's see, that might be a little dirty, but it's going to blend and give us that shadow look. Now I'm going to just clean that up with my edge. I don't want my fingers to touch the rest of the painting and mess it up. So, and remember, I can just come back in with a little brush if it's not the way that I want it, or if I pick up too much or don't spread it enough. Okay, I like that a little bit better. All right, so I'm going to come back in with a brush because I'm running out of paint and I'm not going to squeeze anymore because I don't need that much more. So come back in with a brush and just get those empty edges. I'm going to take extra water out because I don't want it watery. I just need to pick up some paint and move it. So it can be damp, just slightly damp. So I'm just going to pick up some paint, not too much. See, that's too much. Spread that out. I had extra. If you just move it, just move it. Make it look natural. You don't want ruled lines from nature. It needs to be natural. Okay, I'm going to fix that little dip in there. All right, that's much better for me. So I don't want those strokes in there, but I'll come back in and fix that in a minute. I can come back in with my palette knife. Now what I want to do is put a little bit, I want to put some white in there, but it's not going to stay, like it's going to blend with that yellow. That yellow is too yellow. I want it a little bit lighter, so I'm going to clean this red off because it has that purple in there. I'm just wiping it. I'm not even going to use water. So I'm going to take this edge because I need that side on the back end, on the back side. And I'm just going to pick up some white, but I want my white to mix a little bit because I don't want it to be white. So I'm going to pick up some white. Let's make sure it's not too watered. Like I said, I sprayed my paint in between demos so that it wouldn't dry. So I have a little roll of paint there, if you can see that on that edge. And then I'm gonna, I think that might be a little bit too much. Let me get some of that off. But you get my point. I'm just trying to show you that I need some paint on that edge. All right, now let's try that. Now I'm just gonna very gently. If it's too much, just lay it in there. Just lay in just a little bit. Need a little bit more. Just lay in a little bit. Get the extra off your brush. I'm sorry, your palette knife or your brush if you're using a brush. And then now I took all the extra off, so I'm just gonna spread because I want that white to mix in with the yellow just a little bit and then mix in with the red just a little bit. But just enough so that it's not too white and it's not too yellow. And anywhere I need to have the hint of another peak or another crevice in that rock, I'll just add just like a little bit more. There we go. So I'm going to do the same thing here since our light source might be sort of in the middle. I'm going to do the same thing here. Since I've turned, I'm going to use this side now. So let me get that extra off the other side because then it'll come down here and I don't want it in that part of the mountain. So I want it on the edge. So let's get some yellow first. Now this is dried, so I'm going to have to be very careful with my yellow. That dried while I was doing all this other stuff. So let's just come in. I need it on the tip so I can control it better. This is another warm color exercise. I kind of don't want this one as highlighted as this one. So let me get that edge a little bit more defined. Okay, good. And I want to get that part a little bit more defined. I'm going to have to use the tip and be very intentional and specific with my strokes here. All right, that looks good. Let me get that little, blend that little part. Now, I don't want as much highlight here as I do here because this one is a little bit further back. It could be the shadow coming from this mountain on this side. So I do want to pick up a little bit more, either orange or red. If I put red there, it's going to turn orange. Or if I don't want it, that I can do, if I want it a little bit yellower, I can add orange. If I want it a little bit oranger, I can add red, if that makes any sense. So I need to pick up some of this red over here because I'm out of red on my palette. Just pick up just a tad and come in there with that. And then I need to press and blend, press and blend. I'll even pick some of that up. Okay, now I need a little bit of red here. I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel here. I'm about out of red on my palette and I don't want to put any more on there. So I'm just, it's gonna be a little dark. So I'm gonna take the rest of that off and just, same thing with my tip, be very intentional. And remember, these are rocks, so it doesn't have to look perfect. I'm gonna take a little bit more of this red and put it here. Okay, that's a little bit more definition, so I like that. All right, I'm gonna leave that alone because if I mess with it too much, it's not gonna be right. So I can come back in here and get more rocks. I can do a trail, anything like that. With what's left on my palette, I have white, I have yellow, and I may have to add. So I think I'm gonna come back in with some more red here. So I'm gonna have to put some more red in there, but just a little bit because I don't have a bunch left over on my canvas. So let's go in with a drop of red. And now I can go back to my big brush to cover more canvas. I don't need a lot of water. I do not want a lot of water, but it needs to be damp. It doesn't need to be dripping. So I'm going to get the excess water out of my brush, use my paper towel. Now I had some white on my paper towel, now I got on my brush, so I have to do that again. Sorry. I don't want white here. Unless I'm just highlighting a few little rocks here and there, but I want more control over that, so I don't want any accidents. So let me make sure I use the clean side of my paper towel that does not have the white from when I cleaned my palette knife. Now I'm going to just take, I still think I have too much water in my brush. I'm just going to take a little bit of that red that I squeezed out. You can't really see my palette, but I'm going to just saturate it into the ends of those bristles, into the ends of that brush, so that's pretty much like that. I think that's too much, so I'm gonna, actually it's too concentrated in one area, so I'm gonna spread it out, and I'm gonna just use light strokes. Okay, so this is dry now, so I'm going to just dab, just touch the ends of the bristles in the water, dab it on the paper towel, still too wet, come back in, dab it on the paper towel. Your paper towel is your friend, have plenty nearby. All right, so let's just come back in. Try to stay horizontal, unless you have to get those edges and then come back like I showed you earlier. There we go. You want to leave some of this because you need to have a distinction between this peak and that peak. So let's leave some of that, but it's a little bit too light. All right, so I'm blending all this together like there was no separation there. I'm going to come sideways just a hair, and then I'm going to come back and blend that in horizontally. I just need to get some of that. All right, there we go. But you don't want a line there. I don't want that line, so I'm going to have to use the other. Just scratch it in there. All right. And then go in the other direction. Okay, I don't want to mess with that too much. All right, so at least that gave me a layering a little bit more. Now we're going to go back in with some details there. It depends on what you want in this mountain peak. Do you want a trail? A little bit of red there. Do you want some crevices, some crags, some branches? Whatever you want. I don't want any green in this painting though, because I want this to be, I'm using my warm color demonstration. I want it to be my warm color. So I'm going to take my palette knife with that red that I just put on my canvas. I don't have much left. I'm sorry, my canvas. On my palette, I've got a little roll there. I'm just going to come back in with some rocky details. It was good that I had that blue in there because you could tell a difference. So I'm going to have to squeeze out a little bit more color to come in here and get this part, and then maybe we'll do a path. So I'll come back after the break. Okay, so I came back from the break. I've put some more red on my palette. I'm using Naphthol Crimson, and I've added a little bit of blue because I want a very red violet, because it's the red out of the tube is too red. So I've got another palette knife. I can have more control with a broader tip. I'm going to scoop up a roll of paint on the edge of my palette knife. That's my red mixed with a little bit of blue. And I want to take, I've decided that I want to take this, I'm going to blend that, but I'm going to take this down. I want a jagged edge. I'm going to take that down here. I'm going to blend that. I'm going to have to roll the paint. Now I can just give me an edge there. I'm going to blend that in. So let's get our brush now. I want all that extra water out of my brush. Make sure I'm not picking up any white or any other colors from when I cleaned off my, if you need to just get a whole nother paper towel, that's fine. But I want all that water out of my brush. I might have get a little tad so I can blend this bottom part in here. You'll know if it's too much or not enough. So I'm just gonna blend that. too much water. I'm just kind of playing around here. I'm blending here. Notice I'm not touching that edge. I'm just getting underneath. And if I have to really do that to blend, I can. But you don't want to go too much in the opposite direction because it's going to mess up your brush strokes and pick up too much color. So I need to blend this. Remember I said I was going to do that? Circular motions. So I'm going to take this other side and I'm going to clean up that edge without putting too much more pigment on there before it dries, and it's starting to dry. And these lights are making it dry fast. And like I said, if I have to go back in with my palette knife again to get that rocky crag edge, I can. Because I don't want this part to be smooth. So I'm going to have to sacrifice one part and then come back in and go back in there with it. Because it was drying pretty fast. And I need to blend that. So I need to get that paint off my brush, and I need to do it quickly because it's drying. And it's drying fast. And that's too much. If you have too much water, it'll pick up that paint. You need it to look natural without taking the color completely off. Okay. So it looks like the Sahara now. Like I said, I can come back in. I think I'm going to use this palette knife again. I had a little bit more control for that edge. Pick up some of that red violet. I want to put in those peak edges. I want it to be a hard edge there. I don't want it soft. But see how I'm picking up that that pigment. I want to take that off. Okay. So I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this, but I think I'm going to blend some of that darker red violet into this area without going into that peak. I think I'm going to do that with a brush, a stiffer brush. I'm going to take that same color, take all that extra water out. Let's get a little tad more water. And let's get a little wash in there so we can figure out what's going to go in this area. Oh, that's not enough. Still not enough. Too red. Just kind of have to experiment until you get it the way you want it. Too purple. Almost just right. Okay, so I just want to get some of that in there. I'm going to come back in and blend those edges in there. Let's do that now. Let's get the extra paint out of this brush. I got to do it quickly before it dries. Get a wet brush, damp brush, I should say. You don't want it dripping. And I want to lightly, gently blend that on the edge. Because you don't want to pick up the color and erase what's already there. Might be so delicate that you might not even be able to see that. But I want to leave that edge there. I'm leaving that edge because I want the distinction between this peak and that one in the back. All right, I can't bother that too much. Okay, that's not bad. I think I want a little bit more red here on the edge. Let's see if I can paint that in just gently. Now it's going to disappear if I put too much, so let me get some of that off my brush. The more you blend, the lighter it will be. Keep that edge there. Come down here a little bit, too much. So I can come back in. Now I'm going to get that extra paint off my brush. Get all that extra water out of my brush. And then come back in and find the brush is almost dry. And that might be good because I want to pick up the extra and I want to blend at the same time and not leave a line. That's too red and thinking there. I have to step away from this and look because I'm close up on it. I can't really see it. So let's do that. I don't want those strokes. Lightly, lightly. I'm just like even barely tapping the brush. Barely tapping the canvas. You can, if I don't like that, I can just take my little paper towel and just dab some of that pigment off of there. Or I can go back in there and put it back. A little bit lighter that time. So I think there's too much pigment in there now. I need to decide, do I want to take it off with the brush or do I want to dab it with the paper towel? I think I want to dab it with the paper towel because the brush is leaving strokes. Now that's okay that I have a little bit of white because I can just spread that, but you have to do this while it's wet. And I'm going to swipe up the side like that because I don't want that line there. I'm going to go in the opposite direction. And then I'm going to go there again. I want a little bit more of that dark, just a tad more. All right. I'm going to leave that alone and step away and see what that looks like. Okay, I'm back from the break and I've decided I'm going to make this trail a little lighter, if it's a trail. I'm going to come back over this with the solid red with a little bit of water. I think I've got too much in there. I have another idea about how I want to do this. And we'll see if we can make that work. So I think I've got a little bit too much water in my brush because it's watering down the red and I don't want that. So I'm going to come back in with some more color, trying not to add too much red to my palette at a time unless I just really, really need it. So I'm going to come back in with that solid Naphthol Crimson. It's a really red. It's a cherry red. It's a tomato red almost. Let's see if I can get a little bit more color and less water there. It's a little bit too watery. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry a little bit after I work on this part, and then I'll come back in. I just wanted to kind of dull that down. It was a little bit too harsh. I'm gonna come back in with those edges. Matter of fact, I'm gonna do that now, but I'm gonna do it with a different brush because I still want to keep that color on my current brush because I'm still gonna work on that. I just want to take some of these. It was a little bit too watery to start with, so I want to take some of this out here. Start with a wet brush, just water and just blend. Be careful with those brush strokes. I just want to blend that out. Just want to blend this out. Now when that dries a little bit, I'm going to come in with a little bit more solid pigment, less water. I really don't want these lines in here from this brush stroke, so I'm going to dab it on my paper towel. Make that come together a little bit more. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit, and while that's drying, I don't want to do that. I need to take that off, that last little bit, because it's covering up my... So I'm picking the color up, wiping it on my paper towel, because I want that off. Blend that out. So I'm going to come back to that go back over that part, I'm going to add a little, I think they call them Japanese maples in here, but I want to take that darker pigment, so I'm going to pick up a little bit more of my blue and make that red violet again. The red violet. And this again is a study on warm colors. I don't want it too purple. I want it to look like it's in, you know, it's a shadow silhouette. All right, so I'm just going to take this flat edge, flat brush, and I kind of want to sit it back away from it a little bit. I want to dab in, and we want to get the perspective right. Dab in my little tree here. And I'm just kind of going with my gut on how it should look. Get my perspective right. I don't want it too big, don't want it too small. And I'm going to take the corner here. And let's let him sit on a rocky little crag. Get a little bit more of that base in there. Now I can come back in, once I've laid that in, I can come back in with a little darker pigment here, just in a few little spots, because I still want that red violet color. I'm going to get the corner of my brush. It's a little too wet, so I'll probably let that dry and then go back to that and then come back to this. And I kind of want a few more little, get some of that color off the brush. It's too loaded. Bring that out a little bit more. I want to play with this. It's starting to run here, so I want to be very careful there because I want it to look like leaves. And I don't want it to run. It got too wet back there. So I'm going to leave that alone for a second. I think I'm going to just slightly dab where I think it's running a little bit too much. I'll just take a corner of my paper towel. Barely touch. Just barely touch. Barely touch. You don't want it to run. You still want it to look like leaves. So you need a paper towel on hand just in case your wet is too wet. All right, I'm going to leave that alone because I want it to still have the look of the tree. So I want to come back here. What I'll do is I'll clean my brush again, and I'll get all of the, first let's get all the excess paint out. You can take a palette knife and just kind of scrape it out. Put it back on your palette, use it again. If you've got too much paint loaded in the brush, I want to clean all of the paint out. And then I'm going to get most of the excess water out because it's starting to run here. I'm going to go back here and work this in. And as I work it, it can dry. So I want to get as much of the water out of my brush as I can, but I still want it damp. So let's try to go back in and just kind of pick up that. It's not going to take up the other color because behind it it's dry. We had a little break and let that dry. So let's just pick up that. That's kind of getting a little runny. Let's just swipe it across, get as much extra moisture that's still left. And if you spread it thin, it'll dry quicker because we're going to come back over that again and make more like of a little pathway here. I want that to blend a little bit more. I still see my brush strokes there. It's not dry all the way. I can still come back in and fix that. That part is okay because I think we're going to come over there. So now, and what I can do, if my brush is dry enough, I can just take the edge of this and suck up some of that paint that's trying to run. Just a tad. You still want the composition of the leaves. You're just taking off those extra pieces that are trying to get too runny. I have a little bit too much water on my brush. This part may not matter because it's the trunk. And I may come back in just a tad darker with that, but I'm gonna let that dry because I don't want to mess with that too much. So let's go back, let's get that dark out of my brush. Let's go back in with some of the red. Now, I've gotten most of the water out of my brush, so I'm gonna come back in. I need a little bit of water. I don't want to take it all the way out, but I don't want it soupy or runny. So let's go back in with some of that red and lay over there and try to get like a pathway or a crevice, or let's get more color, less water. Because it's already moist on the canvas. You don't need any more water than what's already there because we had to take some off. Now, I've got that loaded in here on my brush. That's pretty much just pigment. So I was trying to come through here and make maybe a ridge, a path, a walkway. Let's see if I have enough. I might need to put, okay, that's too red on top of red. So I think I'll put a little tad of yellow in there to make it a little orange. See if we can do that. Either I can mix it in first, or I can lay in the yellow on top of the red and it'll mix on the canvas. So it's not really showing up. Let's see. Okay, let me get a little bit more yellow. Just a tad. I just want it, I don't want it orange, I don't want it yellow, I just want it a little bit lighter than the red on top of the red. I need to be able to see a little bit of differentiation between the background red and the middle red and that red that I'm laying on top of there. So why don't we do this? Why don't we, all right, now if I mix that, that's a little bit better. Come back in just a little bit more, and then I can go back over that with some more red. So all I needed was just a little highlight, top of that dark. Remember, you want to always do your background first, but sometimes you have to come back in and fix stuff. I blended it in too much. So I still see that dark behind it. It was just too dark. Now, if I need to go back in with some more red on top of that, I probably want to let that dry because it's all it's going to do while it's wet. It's just going to keep mixing, and it's going to give you the same color over and over again. So let's just go in here, make some of that disappear. And this is just a demo. It's just a little likeness. So I need to stand back away from that to see what that looks like. And this is our warm color demonstration. Thank you. Okay, now for our pathway, I've decided to add just a little white to pick up that red and a little bit of yellow so it won't be pink. And then that way we'll get a little bit lighter and have a little bit more definition. So let's see how red we need to make it. Now my brush is going to be dirty now, and that's fine. So I'm going to start out really small. A little bit more white. Tad more yellow. really going to get bold here with that white and that yellow. I'm going to bring out that pathway. I'm not going to be afraid here because I know that I can paint over it if I need to. A little bit more yellow, too much yellow, a little bit more white, a little bit more red. I'll come back in with some red over the top of that. I want this to be more red and less yellow. So let's get red only. Need a little tad of water. It's starting to drag. If it starts to drag, you can tell you need a little water. All right. Just focus on that walkway. I need to get my edges, keep my edges horizontal to the horizon line, parallel to the horizon line. It's starting to drag a little bit more. I need some red here. It's getting too pink. Now, I really want to take some red. I need to let this dry a little bit more. I'm going to take a dry brush, I'm sorry, a clean brush, but wet. Well, damp. In between damp and wet. Let's get those edges cleaned up. Starting to look a little scratchy with that dry brush. You don't want it that dry feel. Check on my tree here. Still not dripping. As long as it's not dripping, we're good. I don't want to play with that too much in the middle. All right, I need some more red down there, but I'm gonna let that dry. Actually, I could even use this brush. Let's see if I can just take red and put it straight on there for the sake of time. Let's see what that'll do. All right, I like that. I don't want to blend it all the way, but it is a little wet, so I do need to let it dry a little bit. But I'm going to step away from that and check this out. And that's our warm color demonstration. So let's play around with that, step away, and look at it. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to stand back, take my brush, and just very gently lay in a little walkway. I've got white and yellow and a little bit of red on my brush. Got a little walkway in there. That white was just enough to pick up that highlight. The yellow kept it from being too white, too pink. Just a few little streaks in there. I want to keep on horizontal. I need to pick up just a tad more white. See, it's wet down there. That's why it's all mixing. Every time I go down there to do something, it mixes up. So if I'm gonna do it, if I'm gonna work at it now, then I have to put more white on my brush. or I could let it dry and then do what I've been doing. But for the sake of time, I'm just gonna put a little bit more white. It'll mix. If you've ever climbed Stone Mountain, you know that some of those rocks they kind of just blend in. The walkway just turns into path and then rocks, and then the path is non-distinct, indiscriminate. Just gently. All right, I don't want to work that too much. So I think you get the point on that. So that's our warm color mountain demonstration. Thank you for watching.